Busan mayoral election. The remaining variable is Moon Jae-in's footsteps, temperature of perspective, Busan's growth rate at national bottom. What's needed is economic practicality, not political symbolism. Temperature of perspective aims for an independent viewpoint that reads the true temperature of phenomena amidst the flood of indiscriminate information. Between overheated political strife and cold economic indicators, we pinpoint the critical point where the essence of the event is hidden. Will former President Moon Jae-in actually appear in downtown Busan wearing a blue tie? Along with Daegu, Busan has emerged as the biggest battleground for the June 3, 2026 local elections. In the election to choose the final person in charge of this place, the most powerful variable is former President Moon Jae-in. According to the results of an automated response system, ARES, poll conducted by the polling agency Flower Research on October 13th to 14th, targeting 1,004 adults aged 18 and older living in Busan. In a virtual head-to-head match for Busan Mayor, Representative John Jae-soo of the Democratic Party of Korea recorded 49.9%, and the incumbent Mayor Park Hong-joon of the People Power Party recorded 41.2%. The gap between the two candidates was 8.7 percentage points, with Representative John Jae-soo maintaining a lead outside the margin of error, plus or minus 3.1 percentage points. However, this result differs somewhat from the trend in other recently released polls, where Mayor Park Hong-joon consistently showed a disadvantage of more than 10 percentage points against Representative John Jae-soo. Analysis suggests that as the candidates of both parties are confirmed and the election approaches, the conservative support base is beginning to rally. In the Flower Research poll, the age groups with relatively low support for Rep. John Jae-soo were those in their 10s and 20s. John Jae-soo 32.6%, Park Hong-joon 46.9%, and those aged 70 and older. John Jae-soo 35.9%, Park Hong-joon 57.7%. The trend was similar in other recent polls. Looking at the results of a survey commissioned by Jae-in to MetaVoice and Global Research conducted for 2 days from the 11th, those in their 10s and 20s, John Jae-soo 32%, Park Hong-joon 33%, and those in their 60s. John Jae-soo 41%, Park Hong-joon 46%, showed a close race, while among those aged 70 and older, John Jae-soo 29%, Park Hong-joon 52%, Representative John Jae-soo showed weakness. The overall result was 45% for Representative John Jae-soo and 35% for Mayor Park Hong-joon. In a survey commissioned by Busan MVC to the Korea Society Opinion Institute, KSOI, on the 12th and 13th, it was neck and neck among those in their 60s. John Jae-soo 42.7%, Park Hong-joon 43%, and Representative John Jae-soo received lower support among those aged 70 and older. John Jae-soo 29.7%, Park Hong-joon 50.6%. The overall results were 48% for Representative John Jae-soo and 35.2% for Mayor Park Hong-joon, respectively. Busan's 10s, 20s, and 60s are hesitating among the elderly, where conservative support is traditionally strong. The sentiment of veto against Representative John Jae-soo is relatively clear, and the hearts of those in their 10s, 20s, and 60s seem to be hesitating. In this context, support for Representative John Jae-soo was relatively high among citizens who perceive their ideological orientation as moderate. In the Flower Research survey, the support for Representative John Jae-soo among moderates was 57.9%, higher than Park Hong-joon, 34.5%, and in the Jae-in results, support for Representative John Jae-soo among moderates was 43%, while Mayor Park Hong-joon's support was 30%. In the case of the Busan MVC survey, they were recorded at 55.1% and 29.5%, respectively. As is the case with any election, but especially in the Busan region where conservative support has been high, the indicators of public opinion polls show that capturing the moderate vote is the key. The June 3rd local election is about 40 days away. The fact that Representative John Jae-in is performing relatively well in recent virtual mayoral polls seems to be due to factors such as being a person who achieved 3 terms in Busan, a difficult area for the Democratic Party, and remarkable achievements such as the relocation of the Ministry of Oceans and Fisheries to Busan. However, looking at the most recent results, it is difficult to say that the trend has completely solidified. Mayor Park Hong-joon, who was confirmed as the People Power Party candidate, is closely chasing behind. In this situation, I summon a scene of imagination. A scene where former President Moon Jae-in visits the Busan area, smiles brightly, and raises Representative John Jae-in's arm high. If they see this sight, what will Busan citizens think? Busan dreaming of the Northern Sea Route, what does the symbol of the past Moon Jae-in mean? The approval rating of former President Moon Jae-in, which exceeded 80% among those in their 10s and 20s in the early days of his inauguration, fluctuated greatly, falling to the 30% range at the end of his term. In particular, the departure phenomenon centered on men in their 20s, IDNOM, has already been proven by figures. Among those in their 10s and 20s, there is a strong evaluation that former President Moon Jae-in transformed from an icon of hope to the party responsible for the explosion of real estate prices or the fairness controversy. Especially among those without a clear political orientation, the cynical afterimage remains that he did not change our lives as much as expected. In addition, the appearance of former President Moon Jae-in risks further solidifying the veto sentiment among the elderly and acting as a stimulant that revives memories of judgment for the moderates. In this local election, which is the first nationwide election held after the unprecedented emergency martial law incident, the dismissal of former President Yoon Suk-yeol, and the inauguration of the Lee Jae-myung administration, there is a high possibility that the judgment of the Yoon Suk-yeol regime will prevail. The high approval rating for President Lee Jae-myung gives a hint of this. However, the Busan area seems more likely to show a somewhat different flow. Looking at recent polls, Busan citizens' top priority interest is overwhelmingly economy and jobs. This means there is a strong trend towards seeking practicality rather than showing political loyalty. Busan's economic growth rate, Gross Regional Domestic Product, GRDP, recently recorded the lowest level in the country. Representative John Jae-in, who steadfastly served even in difficult areas, established his position as a 3-term member of the National Assembly and played an active role as the first Minister of Oceans and Fisheries of the Lee Jae-myung government. For him, who dreams of leading the era of the Northern Sea Route, what the footsteps of Moon Jae-in will mean must be carefully weighed. For more details regarding the cited public opinion polls, please refer to the website of the National Election Survey Deliberation Committee. Cho Seon-hai, founder and publisher, TJSGP7847 at naver.com. Related video. https://youtube.be/0e-w78ecc5m. This article was translated from Korean using AI technology. This English translation is provided for the convenience of global readers. While every effort has been made to ensure accuracy, the original Korean version shall remain the sole authoritative legal text. Asasin Media assumes no responsibility for any errors in translation. Original Korean article https://asasin.kr/news-260420